The meeting will come to order. First off, my thanks to everyone for being here promptly on time at 7:30. I think in the last 3 years, we've started all our meetings on time, thanks to your attendance. Can you hear me? Okay, up in the sound booth, can you turn the volume up on my mic? Let's see if that make any difference. That's better. That way I don't get a sore neck all day. How's that? Okay. As most of you know, I'm your town moderator, Bob Hiss, and welcome to this special fall, although it looks like winter, town meeting. Having been advised by our clerk, Susan Galvin, that a majority of town meeting members are in attendance, I hereby declare that a quorum is present for the transaction of business, and this meeting is now open. In keeping with our tradition, we'll start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Will the membership please stand and join with me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Just a few items first. I'm going to remind the audience that strong fragrances and fragrances containing carcinogenic ingredients cause significant adverse reactions in some people, such as migraine headaches. Products with strong fragrances include personal care products such as perfume, cologne, fragrance hair products, aftershave lotion. Attendees at town meeting are requested to avoid products with strong fragrances, and as an accommodation to persons with such adverse reactions, and to allow safe and free access to the auditorium, the lobby, and the restrooms, attendees at town meeting who are wearing products with strong fragrances or who think they may be wearing products with them are requested to sit away from the sections nearest the lobby. That's the first 2 rows up here. By the way, people have talked to me about the seriousness of this, and I just thought I'd tell 2 vignettes, one slightly humorous. Everyone in this room has something called a chemical sensitivity, which is what this is all about. Now, one you've all been exposed to every summer would be a skunk. So there's a fragrance to which almost every mammal on the world is instantly repelled, and I think we would all agree we have an adverse reaction to this chemical that is sprayed by a skunk. But that's a pretty benign reaction. All you do is you walk away and you're okay. You know, you take your dog to the vet and get them washed up, whatever it is. But a more serious one is happening in Hong Kong right now, and that's tear gas. So imagine that you had the same kind of reaction to perfumes that those kids in Hong Kong are having to tear gas. That's an example of a chemical sensitivity that I think we might all be able to relate to. So if you could keep that in mind as we go forward, that'd be helpful. Second, please do tell me if you can't hear either me or members at the microphone, and we'll stop and make sure everyone can hear, because in case anyone has difficulty hearing, we want you all to do that. Third, just to note, the Commission on Disability has met, and they're trying to work out with the town the ability to get town meeting broadcast in closed caption. Apparently is not today, and that way so folks who are home watching and need to see closed caption can't do so today, so they're working to try to get that taken up. So there is that. On to some other business. First, permission has been requested for certain members and personnel of the school committee, planning board, board of health, and other boards, committees, and departments who are not town meeting members to sit on the floor with other members of their respected boards, committees, and departments, upon the understanding, of course, that they will not vote. Hearing no objection from the body, such permission will be and hereby is accorded. Second, permission is granted to Milton Cablevision to televise these proceedings. Also note that there are 2 side aisle microphones, as you know, one here and one over here, and then one in the center, with 3 seats reserved at the front row for those waiting to be recognized to speak. So we're trying to keep these front rows on the right and on the left available for those of you who wish to come speak. Third, I will now entertain a motion to continue to use the rules for the conduct of our annual town meeting on May as the rules for this meeting. Is there a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion carries. Some observations of this meeting. Will have several articles that will require a 2/3 vote. I'll inform you of those before we vote on those motions. And tonight we have 4 announcements. I'll start with one. First, Chairman of the Select Board, Mr. Zullis, and I would like to recognize the work of the Town Government Study Committee. So this committee was formed 8 years ago in November of 2011 and has been serving continuously since that time. You may have, if you've been an avid watcher of all things in town politics, you may recognize some of the things this committee has accomplished. It includes increasing the select board from 3 to 5 members. It includes strengthening the work of the audit committee. For example, the audit committee now hires the town auditor, and the audit committee now reports to you on the observations that they make in the audit, so you can be aware of what the independent auditor is saying about the town. They created the role of the chief procurement officer, which you have passed. They revised the personnel bylaw, which you have passed. They created the IT study committee to look at putting together a strategic IT plan for the town, which you passed. They formed, and with your acceptance, the bylaw review committee, which is still in operation, led by Peter Mullen. And they formed a pilot program in order to try to request a formal way to go get donations from some of the nonprofit organizations in town. I just thought I'd read the members who have served for the past 11 years, and perhaps if there are any in the audience, you could stand up and we'll recognize you at the end. So they would include Leroy Walker, Edward Hayes, Philip Matthews, Robert Hiss, but he's already standing, Mary McNamara, Kathleen Conlon, Anne Marie Fagan, Robert Gatnick, Michael Joyce, Ewan Innes, John Cronin, Kathy Fagan, Marvin Gordon, Peter Mullen, Kerry White, and of course the chairman for all 8 years, Rick Neely. Thank you very much for your service to the town. Next, I'd like to recognize Congressman Stephen Lynch, who is here. You can speak there or up here, your choice.
Good evening. Good to be with you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Bob, for your courtesy. I know that you have quite a bit on the warrant, so I'll try to be brief. Thank you for the courtesy of allowing me to speak. Normally I'm in Washington on Monday night, so it's great to be with you. Many of you probably are aware we had an incident last night with, yesterday afternoon actually, with a Boeing 767 arriving from Paris, from Charles de Gaulle Airport, approaching Logan, over Milton. It's over the door escape slide detached from the aircraft and came down at 310 Adams Street here in Milton. Landed in the backyard of one of our citizens. So we heard about it, myself and Senator Simplety, a little later on last night. We immediately contacted the FAA and Massport to have a briefing first thing this morning. We did have a briefing with the FAA, with Massport, and with the Flight Standards Agency, which is, this doesn't necessarily qualify as an accident under the FAA, believe it or not. Yeah, right. Which makes sense if you've been dealing with the FAA as long as we have, right? But the Flight Standards Group, which is an internal department within the FAA, is conducting an investigation right now. And they have promised Walter and I that we would have answers by this Friday. We had our meeting with them, teleconference with them today. So even though this is not what we've been complaining about, it does illustrate the vulnerability of communities that lie within this RNAV, next-gen, concentrated flight path that Milton and several other communities have to live under. And so we're trying to use this example as a way of illustrating the vulnerability and the responsibility of the FAA and Massport to respond to us. About 3 weeks ago, the old FAA administrator left, and we've got a new person in there now. I met with him, Mr. Dixon, about 3 weeks ago, and I was very firm about our dissatisfaction in Milton with the non-responsiveness of the FAA in general on airplane noise and emissions. So we're trying to build a relationship of better responsiveness on their part. Trying to get them to come in again for a meeting. They say that they've been trying to adopt and have been adopting measures to mitigate noise. So I asked them to come to Milton and explain exactly what they're doing. I think better communications will help us. But so the fight goes on there. In Washington, I know if you're watching TV, all you're seeing, it's all about the impeachment inquiry all the time. We have an unwritten rule here at town meeting that we don't get political at town meeting. So I will simply say that as a member of Congress representing you, now I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and that is exactly what I intend to do during this entire process. Later on this week, we will refer a report to the Judiciary Committee. They will take it up, and I believe they will issue articles of impeachment, which we will have to vote on. And after we read those and determine the validity and the evidence behind those articles of impeachment, we'll vote on them, and either we will send them to the Senate or not. But that's what's coming up in the next 2 weeks, I think. It'll be 2 weeks before we actually vote on any referral to the United States Senate. But apart from that, we've actually been doing some good work in the United States House of Representatives, and I just want to run a few things by you because I think they're noteworthy, and I think they have a direct impact on the constituents here in Milton. H.R. 1, which is the SAFE Act. You may not believe this, but there are about 9 states in the United States that do not have a paper backup system for their election. And so we are worried that if the digital calculation were hacked or compromised, there is no way to read a paper ballot to basically back up whether those figures are correct or not. So we passed a bill, the SAFE Act and the SHIELD Act, which would actually provide about $400 million for every state to tighten and build resilience within their election systems, but notably it would allow those 9 states to develop paper systems to back up their digital tabulation, which is very, very important. We are very fortunate in this state. My subcommittee on national security did a hearing recently on election system resiliency, and ours in Massachusetts, thanks in large part to our Secretary of State, Bill Galvin, is one of the strongest in the country, and probably is a national model to others that are trying to create resiliency in light of the intrusions that we experienced back in 2016 and 2018. Again, the SAFE Act would provide $400 million to states to enhance that resiliency. Also, a number of bills that we've sent over to the Senate. H.R. 9, the Climate Action Now Act, which would basically re-engage the United States in the Paris Climate Accords. H.R. 5, the Equality Act, which ensures LGBTQ members of our community protections and actually amends the civil rights laws to extend the anti-discrimination protection with regard to employment, education, housing, and federal funding for LGBTQ members of our community. H.R. 1644, which is the Save the Internet Act, which will restore bipartisan net neutrality protections to protect consumers and authorities to support broadband access for rural communities as well. H.R. 1585, the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act, which improves services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and expands existing protections to modernize and update programs and resources for survivors. H.R. 1112, which is the Enhanced Background Checks Act. This bipartisan bill fixes the Charleston loophole by extending the time allowed for the FBI to complete a full background check from 3 days to 10 days. If you recall, in that shooting, the FBI was not able to conduct a full background check in the 3 days. And under the old law, actually under the existing law, a gun shop had to, if there was no evidence or no response, no negative response to the background check within 3 days, then the proprietor had to issue that weapon. And that's what happened in the Charleston case. They didn't have enough time to complete it in 3 days. The weapon issued, and then we had that massacre. So With the 10-day extension, basically, the FBI indicates that every single background check that we would like to conduct with regard to these weapons would be able to be conducted in 10 days. Lastly, Milton has a long and proud tradition of patriotic service to our nation, and it's one of my joys and favorite responsibilities as a congressman to nominate the young people and young men and women to our military academies. And I just want to recognize a few of them. Past academies, now I understand is a first lieutenant, but Griffin Hiss, United States Air Force Academy class of 2016. As I said, now he's a first lieutenant. Congratulations, and thanks for your family's service. His parents are Robert and Mary Hiss, 273 Adams Street, graduate of Milton High School. Lou Glinsky, also United States Air Force Academy class of 2016. Parents are Ed Glinsky and Denise Keneally, a Boston College High School graduate. And they follow in the footsteps of Matt Lutch, United States Naval Academy. Parents are Scott and Patricia, St. Sebastian School. Matt Walsh, United States Military Academy class. Parents are John and Ann Walsh, Lawrence Academy graduate. And Michael Mern, United States Naval Academy. Parents are Kevin and Donna, 37 Cheverton Drive, also a graduate of Boston College High School. So congratulations to them, to their families. For a town of this size, that's a lot of people that have had accepted at the United States Naval Academy and military academies. You should be very proud of those individuals. It is an enormous pleasure for thank you. It's an enormous pleasure to represent you in the United States Congress. May God bless the town of Milton, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Next is Ms. Sarah Callahan in the room. Yes. Does not look like. Is it? I can't tell. I'm under the lights up here. I think the Addams family lighting is still blinding me. You're going to give us a brief update on the Youth Task Force, right? Very good.
I'm sorry. I don't have to. Thank you. Thank you, Moderator Hiss, for allowing me to give you all this update. I promised that I would be brief, and I will be. My name is Sarah Callahan. I'm town meeting member of Precinct 4 and the chair of the Milton Youth Task Force. The task force is a group of volunteers appointed by the Select Board in July of 2018 with a charge to explore expanded opportunities and safe spaces for teens to socialize and be productive in our community, and to make recommendations based on the results of such work for the consideration of the Select Board. We have made reports to the Select Board over these past 18 months, most recently to share the results of a feasibility study conducted this past spring. Through this study, we began to look at the type of teen programming that could fit within various types of spaces, either those already held by the town or something newly built. We'll continue to study the results of that report and come back to the Select Board later this year with a set of recommendations for their and ultimately your consideration. Tonight is the first time we're reporting to town meeting, though, and I'm thrilled to share that this community has come together in a very substantive way to start to address what we know is a real need for additional opportunities for our teens. The Youth Task Force has been working for many months to support the Milton Parks and Rec Department in establishing a middle school drop-in program in the newly renovated space in the First Congregational Church. The space is nearly completed, and it is anticipated that the program will begin right after this new year begins. Construction was very slightly delayed recently to address some ADA requirements, so a previously published date of today was not attainable. But the program will run from Monday through Thursday from 2:30 to 6 and be open to all middle school students who reside in Milton. You may have seen the naming contest that the Parks and Rec recently held to name the new program, and tonight I'm very happy to announce that the Wildcat Den was the winning submission. We assume it'll come to be known as the Den. All names were submitted by and voted on by our middle school students. 3 students actually submitted this name independently: Jack Lally, Elizabeth May, and Kylie Chamberlain. and each will win a $25 gift card for their creativity. And I know at least 2 of those students have parents who are town meeting members, so congratulations. This new teen program would not have been possible had the church not embarked on a capital campaign to renovate, had our town leaders not made a commitment to study the issues related to our teens, had a group of donors not stepped forward to cover the costs of all teens participating for this current year, and another to cover the costs of furnishing the space and outfitting it with the things that will make it fun for teens, like video games, a pool table, comfy couches, and a lot of other things. And most importantly, had our teens not come out on multiple occasions to give us feedback on what would make the program appealing to them and their friends. We're a very lucky community. We've been able to hire a fantastic new teen center coordinator. Mark Pendarvis is a newly retired middle school and high school Spanish teacher, and he still loves working with teens. He has hit the ground running. He's made lots of connections here in the community, and he's been helping to ensure that policies and procedures are in place, and most importantly, that we have the right video games in stock. Even with these successes, though, we've only just begun to scratch the surface. As of now, the Wildcat Den will be available only to middle schoolers, only after school, and only during the school year. The Youth Task Force is really looking forward to a time when we have year-round services for all teens. So how will we get there? Well, you can feel free to pull out your checkbooks and write a check to the town if you feel so inclined. But really, in all seriousness, there are general fund budget requests now being considered for May's town meeting, one of which will include a request for increased funding to help grow this program. So we ask you to watch out for that. Please continue to look for information on the work of the Youth Task Force in local media, which has given great coverage to the creation of this program. We have our own Facebook page, and always you can feel free to reach out to our email, which is miltonyouthtaskforce@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Lastly, you may remember that last February, this body authorized the creation of a Milton School Building Committee that was made up of members appointed by the school committee, the select board, and the town moderator. That committee is formed, and we've got a brief report tonight just on a progress report by Carrie Hurley, who is the chair. Carrie, are you here somewhere? There you are. Hi. Why don't you pull the mic down a little bit so everyone can hear you. There you go.
Can you hear me? Great. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Select Board, Warrant Committee, and Town Meeting members. I am Carrie Hurley, Chair of the recently formed School Building Committee. I am here tonight to introduce the members of the committee and to give you a brief update on what we have been working on over the past 5 months. We have not included information that has been previously shared by other committees, and I think it's important to mention up front that due to the fact that we are limited to a quick update, we fully intend to offer information sessions after the holidays that will give you an opportunity to ask questions you might have and will allow our committee to share the detailed analysis we have completed. We have broken up our past 5 months of work into 4 buckets: developed, initial goals, current status, and future goals. At town meeting on February 2019, you voted to establish a school building committee. The moderator was charged to appoint 9 members to serve on the committee, 2 of whom shall be members of the school committee and 2 of whom shall be members of the select board or its designees. The school building committee was formed in May 2019 and has met 9 times, with our first meeting held on June 24th. In our short amount of time working together, it is easy to appreciate the impressive skill sets of our members and the commitment to the task at hand. We would like to acknowledge Moderator Hiss and give him a note of credit for the great work he did finding highly qualified and capable members of the Milton community. That being said, let me introduce you to our committee, who are all here tonight. Aqua Ebong, he's currently an engineer with National Grid. Tim Lombard, he's a project manager with Leggett McCall Properties. Scott Tereshak, he's a director of pre-construction at the Cardinal Group. Sean O'Rourke is an MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing design manager at WSP. and myself. I'm currently an executive director at a mid-sized law firm, Rockeman, Sawyer & Brewster, and prior to that, I spent 19 years in commercial real estate managing high-rise buildings. We are also very lucky to have two dedicated school committee appointed members, Ada Rose Marin and Betty White. And last but certainly not least, we have the select board appointed members, Mike Zulis, current chair of the select board, and Glenn Hoffman, a registered architect with 14 years of experience working on K through 12 schools. So moving on to the next bucket, the initial goals of the committee were to understand the concerns regarding the space restrictions at the schools, to review and assess the enrollment projections, and to develop a timeline for deliverables. We wanted to understand what the schools had been originally designed to accommodate, where the schools currently stand, and what changes need to occur in order to accommodate the continued increase in enrollment that is now being projected. As of today, there have been 20 spaces converted to classrooms. This is at the expense of music rooms, art rooms, libraries, computer labs, and office space. And the short-term plan for the next 5 years would be to convert 5 additional spaces to classrooms, which would be at the expense of additional library space, another music room, preschool, a teacher's room, and office space. We're going to quickly go through the different schools. Glover, if you look at the yellow, it's spaces that have already been converted to classrooms, and the white is what's coming up next. There have already been 4 rooms converted at Glover, and the conversion of a music room is on the possible short-term plan list. Cunningham, there's already been 8 rooms converted with a possible short-term plan to convert the 4th floor attic space to a teacher's room to free up space for additional classrooms. Collycott, they have already converted 5, and the short-term plan, they anticipating creating a classroom in part of the library. And then the Tucker conversions, there have already been 3 rooms converted, and the possible short-term options would be to convert 3 more rooms at the expense of office space, the preschool program, and the teacher's room. Moving on to the data review. NESDEC, the school building committee looked at the updated data and compiled and generated by NESDEC, the New England School Development Council, commonly referred to as the gold standard for school enrollment projections in New England. As we move on to the actual data review, the student enrollment district-wide, the highlights are pre-K through 12 enrollment continues to grow over a 20-year period, a total of an increase of 783 students. Distribution changes a little bit in projections as the large enrollment from pre-K through 5 moves up through the middle school and high school. Projected enrollment for pre-K through 5 shows that we might be nearing the peak of elementary enrollment growth, but we still see an increase in the next 10 years of 132 students. And something I'd like to point out is that we feel that the projections are conservative based on the fact that after 5 years, the projections assume a level birth rate. It does not include unimproved residential construction that we certainly know is coming in the next 10 years. It does not assume the impact of building a new school. As they say, build it and they will come. And 2029 through 30, the pre-K 5 enrollment is almost 400 students more than 2008. The next slide specifically focuses on the elementary school enrollments. As you can see, we continue to use the enrollment at the time the schools were rebuilt as the baseline. In this case, 1,873 students from pre-K through 5 in 2008. And to give you a visual of how the projections from 2020 to 2030 are depicting the enrollment being up an average of 21% over the next 10 years. Then we go on to looking at the enrollment data for in comparison with real estate transactions. So we did a detailed analysis of the Milton real estate transactions from 2008 to current to see if there's any correlation with the enrollment data. We were able to correlate the real estate transaction peaks with enrollment. It also supports the theory mentioned previously that if you build it, they will come. And the Milton Public Schools certainly have an impact on property value. So current status, this really reflects the majority of how our time has been spent. All members went on a school building tour to experience the current enrollment implications at the 4 elementary schools and Pierce Middle School. We invited Don Kenny, our NESDEC demographer, to a meeting that allowed us the opportunity to understand the factors built into the projections, which is birth rates, planned construction, real estate sales, and persistent ratios that are taken into consideration. And it also gave us the ability to question him live about the projections. And we currently have the most recent 2019 enrollment projections, and we have thoroughly reviewed and digested those as well. As we move closer to the decision on the direction that we decided to pursue, we started focusing on the Massachusetts School Building Authority and the process for getting approved funding. We created a preliminary timeline based on MSBA deliverables to get a better understanding of what the road ahead looks like. It does not contemplate all of the different approvals we will need from the town of Milton, and it already pushes us into late 2023. I might add that the current short-term solutions that we discussed earlier are only to solve for the next 5 years, and after that, they assume that there will be a new elementary school as the solution long-term. So moving on to our vote. We were certainly motivated to keep pushing forward on progress to our charge, and based on our independent and detailed review of the enrollment data, real estate trends, and space needs, the School Building Committee voted on November 25th to plan construction of a freestanding elementary school building in order to address the town's long-term space needs. We considered all of the different options shared previously by the school committee, and we felt compelled by the current status of the classroom conversions that took place to accommodate current enrollment, and after reviewing the projections, that a new elementary school should be the planned focus. It is also important to highlight that we are in good company. We are now the 3rd appointed or elected committee that has looked at the overcrowding issue in the Milton Public Schools and that have independently arrived at the same conclusion. Specifically, the school committee voted to accept the recommendation of the Facilities Advisory Committee and voted unanimously on May 1 to recommend the School Building Committee that the construction of a freestanding elementary school is the preferred educational objective of the school committee. So where does this lead us to? Our future immediate goals are to offer information sessions after the holidays, as I mentioned earlier. It will give everyone the vehicle to ask questions, and we can give you all the information that you would need that we've been looking at for 5 months now. We intend to prepare an article for consideration by Select Board and Warrant Committee that will request funds to embark on a feasibility study, select and hire a owner's project manager, and an initial design development, and prepare a statement of interest for MSBA, which is due April 2020. And we will fully engage on site selection process. We know we need to build a school, and now we have to find a site. So that's my quick update, and I think I was under 10 minutes.
You just made it, so
Thank you.
thank you. "23 slides in 10 minutes. I think that's a model for all future presenters. Let's proceed to Article 1, which you'll find on page 7 in your warrant. Article 1, recommended that the town vote to amend the following appropriations voted by the 2019 annual town meeting by the articles referenced in the table below for the 12-month period beginning July 1, 2019. DPW solid waste, a total revised appropriation of $1,187,128. Employee benefits group insurance, revised $12,845,684. Law, a revised $322,500 for a total amendment of $580,727, and that to meet said appropriation, the sum of $50,000 be appropriated from funds released by the overlay reserve and $530,727 be raised from the tax levy. I'd like to recognize Mr. Zulis, Chair of the Select Board, to speak to this article first.
Can I move this, or should I leave it here? Oh. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulis, Precinct 3 Town Meeting Member, Chair of the Select Board. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First, a gross political ploy to ingratiate myself to the voters of the future. For all Milton Public School students who may be watching, classes are canceled tomorrow. I'm looking to the future, not the present. I know. First, just a couple of words on why we are here tonight as opposed to October or January, which was the second option. If we had had just planning board articles, we would likely have had an October town meeting. It became clear in the summer and into the early fall that we had budget issues that we would need to resolve. And so as a result of that, we had planned to have a town meeting in January when we would have some of the results of the fiscal year in that may help us resolve our budget issues. We were informed by the Department of Revenue I guess it was last month, actually no, October, not last month, now October, that the practice of the past of having a January town meeting would not work, and that we had to resolve our budget issue before the tax recapitulation was finished by the assessors on December 31st. And so we had to move our town meeting back to December 2nd, which is why we are here tonight. So I appreciate everyone coming out on this night and on very short notice. So, Article 1, and I'm going to just briefly address Article 1 and 2 because they result from some of the same issues. Oh, we have the slide, very good. So since town meeting, we've had some good news and we've had some bad news with respect to the town budget. First, the good news. We were able, after some work throughout the summer and early fall, to reach an agreement with our 12 town employee unions on a sustainable model of health insurance going forward. This allowed the town to meet its fiscal year 20 goals and to actually to improve the situation a little bit. So this resulted in positive news for the budget, which I'll explain in a minute, with respect to an opt-out, which gave us positive news for the budget. The second piece of good news with respect to the budget is we have had revenue come in and revenue projections come in better than expected since May. And so that was the hope as we decided to have a town meeting later than October, so that if we got some additional results in that showed actual results in, we could more refine our projections and hopefully deal with the issue, and that has been the result of that effort. The bad news. The bad news is the solid waste contract. Market forces that are affecting solid waste are international, they are national, they are statewide, and they are local in scope and effect, and they are now affecting Milton, Massachusetts. This has resulted in a much higher anticipated cost for the new solid waste contract that we entered into in July. There was a very elaborate process that we went through in order to try to get that contract, in order to try to keep the costs down, but we ended up where we ended up with the best possible choice, which unfortunately was some $820,000 to the bad. So, how to deal with the $820,000 to the bad? The first side of it, $669,000, related to the solid waste appropriations from the general fund. And our finance committee, comprised of Ms. Conlon and Ms. Collins, worked with our town administrator and our town accountant, Mr. Dennehy and Ms. Dexter, along with working with the school finance committee throughout the fall in order to try to come up with the best solution possible. We think we have this solution, which is set forth in Article 1, results in allowing us to make a proposal that rebalances the budget with no cuts to services, and other than a cut to the law budget, which I don't think anyone will really have a problem with, perhaps maybe Mr. Freitag, but other than that, we weren't required to make any other cuts, and I can walk you through it very briefly. you'll see up on the slides, I'll just walk you through it very briefly. You'll see the revenue that we started with in May, $111,365,734. The positive news that I spoke about on the revenue side is shown in that column. First, we had $47,000 that was an additional new growth that was approved by our assessors in the Department of Revenue. We had, actually, I can't really read that because it's very, I'm going to read it from this copy right here. We had an additional $50,000 that we can estimate for motor vehicle excise based on the actual results that we've had over the last few months. We had a pilot payment from Milton Academy that came in for $123,000. We can revise our estimates on trash fees and sticker sales based on the results since May up to now. We can revise that up $200,000. And then we've had additional investment income of $110,000. That equals $483,000 as shown in the graph above. We've had an additional overlay surplus that is been approved by the assessors in the amount of $50,000, which equals $580,727. So that gets us most of the way to the $669,956. The balance of that is shown in the expense column, where our group insurance expense shows a negative $39,229, which means because of the new opt-out program, we have had an additional, the costs of the services for the group insurance have technically gone down because employees have opted out. So we save approximately $40,000 there. And then based on what has gone on over the last few months, our accountant felt comfortable in revising down the law services budget by approximately $50,000. And that gets us all the way to the $669,956, which is what you're voting on Article 1. So have at it.
Thank you. Anyone who wishes to speak to this article? Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Good evening, Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I'd like to talk a little bit more about why we should be very pleased with what this article represents. Specifically, and Chairman Zulus alluded to it, but I want to be more explicit, we were presented with roughly a $670,000 issue, and through the work of the town administrator, the town accountant, the town treasurer, and the board of assessors, all behind the scenes, we averted what could have been requests for mid-year cuts to departments, which would have been catastrophic. So I'm going to pause for a moment while you give those individuals a round of applause. So that's the good news. I want to talk a little bit about the budget process that we're currently in, some of which is referenced in the Warrant Committee report, and also about upcoming budget processes. The report of the Warrant Committee references or mentions major capital items, including the firehouses and probably a new school building, as you just heard. It doesn't mention the major repairs, renovations, and updates that will need to be done to the school building. Now, I want to see if you were paying attention to the last presentation. When was the school building process completed? The last school building process. 2008, she wins. So that's 11 years ago. And before I left the school committee and since, they have compiled a major capital plan. We commissioned a 20-year capital plan in 5-year increments. And as you might expect, after 11 years, there are some major renovations that will need to be done to continue to protect these assets. That's another major expense. In addition, town buildings are even older. So count that in as a major expense as well. The last report by the Warrant Committee mentioned that pilot payments or increases in pilot payments could be helpful. That was certainly accurate, and Member Farrington has done outstanding work eliciting increased commitments from Curry College and from Milton Academy. We are hopeful that the hospital will follow suit at some point. But that's not enough. So as we discuss the financial health of the town, in addition to the major capital needs and the impact that that has on the tax burden, we have to acknowledge what is effectively a structural deficit problem. And you've heard this before, but here's why it's important now. That is that the growth rate for wages and benefits exceeds revenue growth. The wages growth rate for the largest budget, the schools, averages approximately 4%. The health insurance cost growth rate is over 5%. Chairman Zulus just alluded to an agreement with the unions for a sustainable health model. I think probably more will need to be done. That's because, as you know, and all of this is from previous Warrant Committee presentations, 78% of our revenue is from property tax growth. So you see the problem. 2.5% growth on property taxes, 4% wage growth on our largest budget, 5 or so growth on health insurance, which will continue, I'm sure, in spite of the recent agreements. So why isn't anybody talking about this? Well, it's a challenge because it's a difficult issue for our elected officials to tackle. It's difficult to get elected on a balanced budget platform where some of the obvious solutions are consolidation of services and roles, reductions in expenses, moderation of wage growth, lowering of health insurance costs, and implementing such things as raising the employee share of health insurance, increasing or including more plan design changes, or perhaps even joining GIC. Probably not a winning campaign strategy. So, given that, I suspect that this sobering responsibility will fall to the town administrator and the Warrant Committee. And that means I submit both of those entities, Mike and the Warrant Committee, will need to be more rigorous and more demanding for evidence of what I call real town-wide solutions to these persistent problems. Nevertheless, to be successful, that will require the leadership and cooperation of the Select Board, the School Committee, other elected boards in towns, and the town's bargaining units. So why do we need a long-term plan, other than that was the one thing that was highlighted in our AAA rating? But apart from that, given all of the experience that we have here, and all across town with financial management, it's obvious. The annual process that we have pits the departments against one another. We have to give one department more. In order to give one department more, we have to give another department less. And an annual discussion, which we repeat year after year, doesn't give any department the time to do either the planning or the implementation of the types of structural changes that will be needed, nor can any one department implement those on its own. The current process sometimes results in personnel cuts at the schools, in the police department, at the library, and those cuts moot any progress that we've made with a previous override. So we have this grow, shrink cycle that also has the effect of having us lose talent that we've recently hired. And any successful organization understands the importance of having a pipeline of talent that is continuous. So here's what I'll leave you with. I'm willing to pay higher taxes, and I would submit we all should be willing to pay higher taxes to ensure that we maintain the quality of life that we treasure here in Milton. However, my position at this point is I will not vote for another override that does not include a 3-year financial plan for achieving a true balanced budget, underscore true, and implements long-term solutions that secure our financial future. Thank you.
Mr. Mullen, are you waiting to speak? No. Okay, Mr. Fay, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey, Precinct 9. With respect to Article 1, I have a general question that I'm sure someone here could answer. About 8 weeks prior to the start of the contract term for collecting of waste disposal, we met and approved a budget. Yet, we weren't able to recognize an increase of almost $820,000 only 8 weeks earlier. Could you explain to the town meeting members the timeline for soliciting the bidding for that, and how we potentially avoid this in the future, where we're approving something in May for a period that begins on July 1st? It would seem that there's a period of time that's awful close. I see Mr. Dennehy standing, so I'll sit down. Thank you, Mike.
Mr. Dennehy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. Fahey, for the question. So unfortunately, in my previous capacity as the Commissioner of Public Works in Boston, we entered into a 5-year agreement for trash and recycling services, both collection and the processing of that. Having come to Milton shortly thereafter, I realized that we were on the same schedule as the City of Boston, and quite honestly, we were held hostage by the City of Boston's bid. We literally did not know whether we had a collector up until probably the 3rd week in June. We sat down with Gino Duggan, their supervisor. It was a very, very arduous situation for the town, not knowing. We knew someone was going to pick up our trash. We didn't know when and how. If you recall, in May, I testified at annual town meeting that we had to go to the 5-day collection schedule, which, touch wood, seems to be working well currently. But what we've done to improve that is we extended this contract that we entered into is actually a 3-year contract. We decided to get off of the same train track that the City of Boston was on. Quite honestly, we couldn't wait till the last minute. Boston collects almost 250,000 tons of debris annually. We might be less than a tenth of that. So just from a business perspective, they weren't really in a hurry to come sit down with us and talk to us. Those trucks need a daily route, and quite honestly, until they figured out what happened in Boston, they weren't relevant. Milton was not relevant. We did see a substantial increase. We had budgeted for roughly 17% in solid waste. Chair Zulus did a good job of explaining the market. We're currently paying the same amount to dispose of a ton of trash as we are for a ton of recycling, which in this industry, I've been managing trash roughly for the last 15 years. That's unheard of. But that's the state of the economy. Very good question, Mr. Fahey. This is the situation we're in. Hopefully in 3 years' time, not only are we not waiting for Boston's contract to come out, the market may have readjusted itself a little bit, and we might be a little bit ahead of the curve. I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak to this article? Seeing none, all in favor of the article, please signify by saying aye. I'm sorry, is there, on the right? All right, no one else. Okay, Mr. Walker, you get the second bite.
All right, quick question after those long remarks. Could someone explain what the $150,000 increase to the solid waste rates, the rates, the stormwater rates, thank you, means for the average homeowner? Well, he spoke to
Well,
me at the same time.
So that is Article 2, right? Could we hold that until Article 2? In that case, if there's no other comments, all in favor of this Article 1, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Article 2, submitted by the Select Board, recommended that the town vote to increase the budget appropriation for the Stormwater Enterprise Fund by $150,000, and that $150,000 be raised and appropriated as follows. I'll just read the right-hand column. The Stormwater Enterprise revenue, a total of $1,008,127. The Stormwater Enterprise costs, subtotal direct, $923,127. The indirect costs, $85,000, for a total of $150,000 delta. Anyone wish to speak to this article? Yes, Mr. Zulus, more comments. Okay.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulus, Precinct 3, Town Meeting Member, Chair of the Select Board. So this is the stormwater stormwater side of the solid waste contract that we entered into in July. In addition to the $669,000 that we had in the general fund, the solid waste contract had a negative effect in the amount of $150,000 to the stormwater enterprise fund. So it was the same contract that created a similar problem. So the question was, on the stormwater side of the house, again, we solved, Article 1 was the general fund, Article 2 is the stormwater enterprise fund. That money, those monies that go into the fund that allow us to provide the stormwater services. So we're $150,000 behind in stormwater based on the contract. We have retained earnings in the Stormwater Enterprise Fund in the amount of $136,000. We have been advised that to use 1/3 of our retained earnings in that fund would be in accord with sound financial practices for a municipality of our size. And so what we propose to do is to use $50,000 from those retained earnings to mitigate the $150,000 negative from the stormwater side of the contract. The balance, the balance is $100,000. So we deal with $50,000 with the retained earnings, and then we have $100,000, and that is the basis of the increase in the fee, the stormwater fee, to mitigate that $100,000 issue. What it amounts to is 75 cents per 100 square feet, which amounts to approximately $6 a year for Tier 1 payers, $10 a year for Tier 2 payers, $13 a year for Tier 3 players, and then additional amounts for the Tier 4 payers. So the proposal is to deal with the deficit in stormwater with partially with the retained earnings and then an increase in the stormwater fee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Zullis. Mr. Walker, still have a question? He did. Very good. I think that Mr. Collins, question?
Webster Collins, Precinct 9, town meeting member. What bothers me about this article is it's inaccurate. We jumped the gun in this town meeting by putting something in advance of an anticipation of a federal regulation that was put in place, but for a very short time. That federal regulation on President Trump's first executive order was eliminated. Legally, what happened was, when that occurs, the stormwater issue reverts to the cities and towns. It's a state obligation, not a town obligation. We've assumed, as our obligation, certain amounts that should be taken and handled by the state. That is basically fundamentally wrong here, and this is what bothers me about this article. The truth of the matter is that within the Commonwealth in Massachusetts, there are 351 cities and towns. How many of them do you think have this article? Simple, 23. That is all. So the bottom line in simple terms is there are certain things within this article that we surely need that are subsumed within DPW. They're not should not be subsumed within this article itself. The article itself, in my view, is emblematic of what oftentimes happens historically within towns like Milton. History shows that once an expense is put in, it stays on the books, whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense. And we have to live by that. So I would like to urge the town to vote no, but it doesn't make any sense to do that because there's certain things here that we truly do need. The problem is that we've got a very good, maybe I'm prejudiced, select board, and we know that we've got a good, strong town administrator, but we've got to start managing from the top down, and when we see something that is flawed, fixing it and correcting it along the way, setting budgets, setting objectives, and then working from that point on down. The truth of the matter is we're a $110 million business enterprise here, round numbers. That's the real world of the town of Milton. That's like the 61st largest private company in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we've got to start thinking strategically and what we do within this town, because as my friend Leroy Walker mentioned, we've got a lot coming down the pike. You heard some thoughts by the school committee tonight. I'm not going to comment on them at that. This is not the appropriate point in time. But we've got a lot of heavy thinking to do going forward, and I just thought I wanted to put those thoughts on the table before you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Ms. Agostino?
Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. The last thing I wanted to do was stand up tonight because I just want to go clear my car off and go home. However, enterprise funds are something that have been dear to my heart for over 30 years. An enterprise fund, following up on what Mr. Collins said, is very limited in what the funds can be used for. I went back and reread the original article, the original presentations to town meeting, and I don't see yard waste anywhere in there. So I really question, and I don't doubt that somebody could actually challenge using funding, which in the past we have used some funds from quote-unquote unofficial enterprise funds inappropriately for other expenses. So I personally am going to vote no on this, and I strongly recommend, Mr. Collins pointed out that we have to do it because we need the money, which may be true, so the vote may go through, but I strongly recommend that this Board of Select people review the legality of charging for yard waste under a stormwater enterprise fund where we've never mentioned yard waste in the original article or in past articles. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak to this? Yes, Mr. Walker.
Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Could we ask Town Council for his opinion on what Ms. D'Agostino just raised?
Yes, we can. I think we'll need a consult for a moment.
Mr. Moderator, perhaps before Town Council opines, Mr. Berkeley can address the question from Mr. Tullio Agostino.
Okay. Mr. Berkeley?
Mr. Moderator, town meeting members, Chase Berkeley, DPW Director. So just to touch on why yard waste was included in the enterprise costs. So the biggest component of yard waste is a maintenance one. So what tends to clog our catch basins.
A little louder, Mr. Berkeley.
Excuse me. What tends to clog our catch basins is leaves. And so there's a maintenance component to picking up leaves and removing them so they don't clog our drainage system. And there's also a water quality component of it. So if you've heard of the algae blooms and cyanobacteria, those leaves break down and create phosphorus, which encourages the growth of those bacteria in our water body. So yard waste is considered a valid stormwater component for maintenance and water quality purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Berkeley. Now, Town Council, do you have an opinion?
Good evening, Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council. Based on Mr. Berkeley's testimony just now, I believe that the fund is appropriately used for these purposes and that the article is appropriate as drafted.
Does anyone else wish to speak to this article? Seeing none, all in favor of the article, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. The article carries. Article 3, recommended that the town vote to appropriate $450,000 to pay the cost of designing and constructing sewer lines to provide municipal sewage disposal for Randolph Ave between Artwell Street and Gun Hill Street, including the payment of all costs incidental and related thereto. Said project to be subject to assessment of betterments for a portion of the cost of said project in accordance with the provisions of Chapters 80 and 83 of the Mass General Laws. That to meet this appropriation, the Treasurer, with the approval of the Select Board, is authorized to borrow said amount under and pursuant to Chapter 44, Section 7-1 of the Mass General Laws, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds and notes of the town therefore. That any premium received upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this town, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 20 of the Mass General Laws, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. And that the Select Board is authorized to purchase, take by eminent domain, or otherwise acquire easements in land necessary to carry out the purposes of this vote. This requires a 2/3 vote since it's a borrowing article. Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulis, Precinct 3 Town Meeting Member and Chair of the Select Board. So this article it comes from the Select Board, and it is directed for 9 houses on Randolph Avenue between Artwell Street and Gun Hill Street. And those houses are on septic system, and those septic systems are approaching end of life. And this article seeks appropriation to create an infrastructure to allow those houses to connect to the town sewage, and the cost will be at most $450,000. That amount would be bonded over 20 years, and the town would recover 2/3 of the cost plus 3% interest over that 20-year period. During that time, the town would be in a position to bill those properties for the town sewer, which would increase the revenue as well. We have had in the past similar projects where we've tried to assist town residents in this way to connect them to the town sewage system, including on Woodland Road and up on Forbes Hill some years back. So the Select Board certainly recommends that we proceed with this as well. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Again, it requires a 2/3 vote. All in favor of the article, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Article 4, submitted by the Select Board, recommended that the town vote pursuant to Chapter 40, Section 3 of the Mass General Laws to establish a revolving fund for the deposit of proceeds from the rental and lease of a portion of 25 Wharf Street, Milton, Mass., starting in fiscal year 2021, which begins on July 1, 2020, and to authorize the Select Board to expend money from such revolving fund for the upkeep and maintenance of said property. Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulis, Precinct 3 Town Meeting Member and Chair of the Select Board. Today, monies that are collected down at the waterfront in Milton Landing go to the park commissioners, and those monies have been used in park properties and have not necessarily been used in the Milton Landing on the waterfront. The goal of this article is to create a revolving fund so that any fees or rents that are collected in the waterfront in Milton Landing stay in Milton Landing and stay in the waterfront rather than be used for other purposes by the park commissioners. And my understanding is that the park commissioners are in support of this and of the use of those funds. And so this article would simply segregate those funds that are collected down at the Milton Landing. And you may know that there's been quite an effort over the last year, actually longer than the last year. The Master Plan Implementation Committee has come up with recommendations for revitalizing the waterfront, the Milton Landing. We have a committee that is working on the Milton Landing with Mr. Wells and Ms. Conlon leading the way on that. And so this article is part of the effort to try to revitalize the Milton Landing and to revitalize the waterfront. So we ask that you support it. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Seeing none, all in favor of Article 4, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Article 5, Recommended that the town vote to authorize the select board to petition the general court to enact legislation in substantially the following form, provided that the general court may reasonably vary the form and substance of this requested legislation within the scope of the general public objectives of this petition. An act exempting the position of harbor master in the town of Milton from the civil service law, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives in general court, assembled and by the authority of the same as follows. Section 1, the position of harbor master in the town of Milton shall be exempt from the provisions of Chapter 31 of the general laws. Section 2, the provisions of Section 1 of this act shall not impair the civil service status of any person holding the position of harbor master in the town of Milton on the effective date of this act. Section 3, this act shall take effect upon its passage. Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulus, Precinct 3 Town Meeting Member, Chair of the Select Board. The Select Board submitted this article. Since then, the Select Board has voted unanimously to recommend that this article be returned to the Select Board to itself for further study. I'd like to make a motion to refer this article back to the Select Board for further study, if that's appropriate at this point, Mr. Moderator.
That is appropriate.
All right, motion's been, thank you very much.
I hear a second. Is there any discussion on the motion to refer this back to the select board? It's been made and seconded. So now if you have any questions or you want to debate the motion to refer, this is the time to do that. If not, I will ask the warrant committee for their opinion on this motion to refer. The warrant committee appears supportive. So we are voting on a motion to refer Article 5 back to the select board. All in favor of the motion to refer, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Article 6, recommended that the town vote to authorize the select board during fiscal year 2020 to accept on behalf of the town any and all easements for any of the, wait, did I skip one? No. Nope, 5, 6, I didn't. Any and all easements for any of the following purposes: roads, sidewalks, vehicular and/or pedestrian access or passage, drainage, and utilities, and to abandon, to relocate easements required for any of the foregoing purposes, provided, however, that such authorization shall pertain only to easements accepted, abandoned, or relocated at no cost to the town. Submitted by the Select Board. It requires a 2/3 vote. Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Mr. Zulus.
All right, I'm tempted to say that you all are making this way too easy. So let's see if we can get through one more. So this is a housekeeping article. It was inadvertently not included in the warrant in May. This allows the Select Board authority to accept easements on behalf of the town as long as there is no cost to the town. And so we urge approval of this article.
Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Again, it requires a 2/3 vote. All in favor of the article, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Article 7, recommended that the town vote to amend Chapter 10 of the general bylaws known as the zoning bylaw by adding a new subsection E to Section 8 to be entitled Planning Board Associate Member as follows. There may be an associate member of the planning board. The associate member may sit on the board for the purposes of acting on a special permit application in the case of absence, inability, or act or conflict of interest on the part of any member of the board, or in the event of a vacancy on the board. In such an event, the chair of the board shall file with the town clerk a written designation for the associate member to sit on deliberation of a particular special permit application. The associate member shall be appointed by a vote of at least 4 members of the planning board, notice of which is filed with the town clerk. Any vacancy in the position of associate member shall be filled by vote of at least 4 members of the planning board appointing a replacement, notice of which shall be filed with the town clerk. The term of an associate member shall be up to 3 years, commencing on the date that the notice of the appointment is filed with the town clerk. An associate member may be reappointed by requisite vote and filing of notice without there being any break in his or her service as an associate member. This is submitted by the planning board. Would anyone like to speak to this motion? Ms. O'Donnell.
It's Kathleen O'Donnell, Precinct 7, member of the Planning Board and designated representative for tonight's meeting. These Article 7 and Article 8 are the result of work done by the Planning Board. I think this is our second or possibly third attempt at having an associate member to handle special permits in the event of the absence, inability to act, or a conflict of interest on the part of a member of the planning board. I would remind you that there are 5 members of the planning board that are elected. There are 9 members of the zoning board that are appointed by your moderator. Half of the special permits in this town are issued by the planning board, and the other half are issued by the zoning board, including comprehensive permits under 40B. So we were trying to balance the need to keep the planning board in a form that it could operate by having the ability to appoint on a temporary basis somebody to fill in for a special permit application, against the need of the town to have elected and responsible, therefore, to the electorate, members of the planning board. So in tonight's meeting, before we met this town meeting, the planning board took a vote and is recommending that this article be moved back to the planning board for further study. I would point out that we received many comments in the last 3 days about what we should or should not consider for this article. I would remind people that the agenda of the planning boards are available on the website. It was great to get these ideas, but it would have been even better to get them probably 7 or 8 months ago. So I thank you all for those comments, but as I said, it would be better if we got them on a timely fashion. So I would like to make a motion, have a motion made to refer Article 7 and Article 8 back to the planning board for further study.
Just want to check, Ms. O'Donnell, are you a town meeting member?
Yes, I am.
Very good. Okay, motion has been made and seconded. Does anyone wish to speak to the article to refer back?
Just 7.
Pardon me?
Just for Article 7.
Just Article 7, right. Anyone wish to speak to the article to refer? Warrant Committee, your opinion? Warrant Committee is in favor. All in favor of referring Article 7 back to the planning board, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Article 8, recommended that the town vote to amend Chapter 11 of the general bylaws by adding a new Section 4 as follows. Section 4. The position of planning board associate member is hereby established per Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 9. The associate member who shall be a resident of the town is for the purpose of acting on a special permit application in case of absence, inability to act, or conflict of interest on the part of any member of the planning board or in the event of a vacancy on the board. Ms. O'Donnell.
As I said, under Article 7, Article 8 is a bylaw amendment to allow for this position of associate planning board member. Since we are sending this back to the planning board, I would request a motion to refer this article back to the planning board for further consideration as well.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Does anyone wish to speak to the article to refer back to the planning board? Warrant Committee? We're getting good at this. All in favor of, jumping the gun. All in favor of referring this Article 8 back to the planning board, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Article 9, recommended that the town vote to amend Chapter 10 of the general bylaws known as the zoning bylaw by striking Section 4B, wetlands regulations, in its entirety. It's submitted by the planning board. Anyone wish to speak to this article? Or Ms. O'Donnell, there you are.
Kathleen O'Donnell, town meeting member, Precinct 7, and also member of the planning board. I should hope that Article 9 is something that is not particularly controversial. As many of you may recall, the planning board has no ability to regulate wetlands anymore. They've lost that ability since the 1980s. For some reason, this provision is still in our zoning bylaw, and as we make our way through the zoning bylaw and look for those things that we can change either by town meeting or regulations, which we have just voted to change to get rid of the requirement for submitting plans on linen. So as we work through this process, I hope that this easy article, that we would agree to pass this one and not refer it back for further study, to remove this provision in the article, in the zoning bylaw that allows the planning board to regulate wetlands.
Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Since it's a bylaw change, it requires a 2/3 vote. All in favor of recommending Article 9, approving Article 9, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Article 10. There's going to be some, I'll read this article, there's going to be some process explanation I'll go through. To see if the town will vote to instruct the select board to petition the general court to establish a motor vehicle speed limit of 25 miles per hour for the approaches to the intersection of Route 28 and Chickatawbut Road in Milton, and for the intersection itself, and to act on anything related thereto. Submitted by a citizen's petition, more than 100 citizens below. You can see the first 10 signatories. The warrant committee recommended a no vote. So, before we start into the discussion, let me just describe the process. We've encountered this before. I'll go back. We're governed here by Rule 5 of our town meeting rules, which we don't print in this warrant, I don't think, but they're in any of your May warrants. Let me read the relevant, it's the last sentence of Rule 5. It says, in the event that the warrant committee recommends a no vote on an article, the question will be presented as a vote on a motion made and seconded to approve the article, meaning members will vote yes if they favor the article and no if they oppose the article as recommended by the warrant committee. So what that means is normally the recommendation of the warrant committee when they're in favor of something, that's our motion on the floor. That's what you're voting for. However, in this rule says since we don't have a recommendation to vote for that, we revert back to the article itself. So the article itself is what you're voting on. Now, since that is now the motion on the floor, as a motion on the floor, you can vote to amend that or not, or we could take a vote on it or not. So now it's a live motion on the floor as it's written in Article 10 printed directly in your warrant. So that's the motion on the floor. So with all that, I'll recognize Mr. Whiteside. I think you're going to speak to this article. Is that clear for everyone now? Good.
Alexander Whiteside, town meeting member, precinct 9, and one of the 143 people who signed this citizen's petition to secure a speed limit reduction at the intersection of Randolph Avenue and Chickatawbut Road. As you know, you undoubtedly know, the current speed limit there for traffic approaching this traffic light is 40 miles an hour, and it's 40 miles an hour in the intersection. This has been the principal factor in making this intersection the 7th most dangerous intersection in Massachusetts, the 7th most dangerous. In one 2-year period between 2014 and 2016, there were 54 crashes at this intersection, and of these, 28 involved a fatality or a bodily injury. The 40-mile-an-hour speed limit for traffic on Randolph Avenue was set some time ago. I have been unable to determine exactly when or how the Massachusetts Highway Department determined this. But currently, they have a procedure. If the Mass DOT were to change this or were to be asked to change this speed limit, they would have to do a speed limit study. And that would involve taking 100 cars, going through this intersection in a free flow, and basically whatever speed the driver wanted to do. It would be on a good day with no traffic, and the 100 cars would be measured as to the speed the driver thought was appropriate. And then the 85th percentile speed would be determined, and that's when you start at the slowest speed through the intersection, you go up to the 85th spot above that, and that's the speed which the Mass DOT would assign as the speed limit. And Mass DOT has suggested that if they did a speed study, because the traffic going through the intersection is currently so fast, the speed limit might be more than 40 miles an hour. What their solution is they're proposing to make design changes to the intersection with their preferred alternative is a roundabout, and the roundabout would have a design speed of 25 miles an hour. That construction on a roundabout, or whatever the solution they eventually determine on, would not occur until 2023. In the meantime, the injuries and the possible deaths at the intersection because of the excessive speed limit would continue. The way to address this is a home rule bill in the legislature which would establish a lower speed limit. Mass DOT knows the speed is too high, but they think that their hands are tied because of the way they are required to set speed limits. The citizens' article is intended to get the speed limit lowered by means of a home rule bill filed by the selectmen. And the language appearing in the warrant was found by town council not to address certain things that had to be addressed, such as where the signs lowering the speed limit should be put. Accordingly, amendment to the article was necessary, and I have been discussing with town council exactly what he would want in a proper article. And he has replied with language. And the language is currently on the screen. I did prepare a hard copy of a proposed motion to amend, which is now obsolete because of additional conversations with town council. This is the amendment which I propose, and I move as follows. I move that the town vote to authorize and request. This would be language amending the current article in its entirety. I move that the town vote to authorize and request that the select board petition the general court to enact legislation in substantially the following form: provided that the general court may reasonably vary the form and substance of the requested legislation within the scope of the general public objectives of this petition. An act establishing speed limits on portions of Route 28 and Chickatobit Road in the town of Milton. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives in general court assembled, and by the authority of the same as follows. Section 1, notwithstanding the provisions of Chapter 90 of the general laws or any other general or special law to the contrary, the general court, 1, shall establish a motor vehicle speed limit of 25 miles per hour for the approaches to the intersection of Route 28, a state highway, and Chickatobit Road, a Department of Conservation and Recreation Park Road in Milton, and for the intersection itself. And 2, require that posting of this speed limit be made by signage installed in such places as deemed necessary or appropriate by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation with respect to the state highway and the Department of Conservation and Recreation with respect to the Park Road. Section 2, the Department of Transportation and the Department of Conservation and Recreation shall take all actions necessary to implement the establishment of such speed limit. Section 3, this act shall take effect upon its passage. That's the motion.
We have an article made and seconded. By the way, I consulted with, Mr. Whiteside, you're fine. I consulted with town council on the issue of scope, with the chair of the warrant committee and the select board, and in my opinion, this amended motion fits within the scope of the original article, so I believe it's allowed. Now, so the motion on the floor is now the recommendation you see up on the screen, if everyone can see it. Anyone wish to speak to the motion to amend? Yes, Ms. Wenson.
Can everyone hear me okay? So I drove through this intersection during the morning commute every weekday for 6 years. And as Alex mentioned, it is one of the most dangerous intersections in the state for a variety of reasons. The visibility issues coming over the hill on Randolph Avenue, coming toward Milton, the drivers are not expecting a stopped car turning left onto Chickatawbut. As Alex mentioned, there have been fatalities there as well as other serious injuries. The speed of the traffic along with the visibility issues are the two biggest concerns that I have noticed there over the years. It's my understanding that it was the Department of Transportation, DOT, that came in and announced that 25 miles per hour would be the best speed limit for this intersection by suggesting a roundabout that brings the speed limit down to 25 miles per hour that would address the safety issues here. The roundabout, if it happens, won't take place for many years. I think Alex said 2023 would be the earliest it would start. In the meantime, the citizens in this neighborhood and across town, 143 of them, I think, are asking to slow the speed limit down here at this intersection. So I support these neighboring families in requesting a safe speed limit so close to children and the recreational hikers and bikers of the Blue Hills. So I support this article wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak to this motion to amend? I think Mr. Chinman, you won the race.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Chinman, Precinct 2. I'm not speaking at all against the intent of this article or the amendment. My concern is whether the police will be able to effectively enforce a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit that's enacted pursuant to this. Looking at the speed limit statute, because the speed limit statute says that unless a way is otherwise posted in accordance with the provisions of Section 18, I'm reading from Section 17 of Chapter 90, unless a way is otherwise posted in accordance with the provisions of Section 18, it shall be prima facie evidence of a rate of speed greater than what is reasonable and proper, and then it has different types of roadways. And I believe the roadway we're talking about here would qualify for the 40-mile-an-hour presumed speed limit. So you can have a lesser speed limit if that speed is posted in accordance with the provisions of Section 18. And Section 18 gives different ways of the speed limit to be enacted. It can be enacted by the City Council, the Transportation Commission of the City of Boston, the Board of Selectmen, Park Commissioners, a Traffic Commission, Traffic Director, or the Department, meaning the Department of Transportation, on ways within their control. If it's not set by one of those ways, I think that speeders are going to have a defense to the speeding ticket, because the general court establishing the speed limit is not one of the ways. And I'm just not sure that Section 2, giving the Department of Transportation shall take all actions necessary to implement it, is going to cover this enough. So my only concern is that I'm not sure this language allows for speeding tickets to be written and then upheld by the courts. That's my concern, whether there's, and I wonder if Chief Wells could speak to it.
Okay, so we have a question about the enforceability and issuing of speeding tickets, given the language of this article. Town Council, you think you have an answer? For the member?
Mr. Moderator, Kevin Freitag for the Office of Town Council. It is my opinion that given the fact that Route 28 is a state highway and that DCR owns, the Department of Conservation and Recreation owns Chickatobit, which is a state agency, it is appropriate to submit this petition to the general court to set the speed limit on those two state roads. I believe the issue that's been raised perhaps pertains more to roads, which in the scheme of either state highways or roads are typically town roads, and the towns have certain ways of setting speed limits on roads, as opposed to the process for setting speed limits on state highways, which falls outside the general typical authority of the town. So, in other words, the general court, the state legislature, in my opinion, does have the right to set the speed limit on this state highway. The general court has specifically set the speed limit on the Mass Pike by way of statute, which has been amended twice. And in accordance therewith, I believe that this article is appropriate and proper, and the motion before town meeting is also appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Freitag. Ms. King?
Ginny Donahue King, Precinct 3. Pardon me, I'm stepping on the foot here. To be honest with you, I don't know how I'm going to vote on this yet. I have some conflicting issues that I'm thinking about. Initially, I thought it was crazy to do this. I've been thinking about it more, and now I worry if we do this, it could cause some really terrible accidents because there are people that could flaunt all of this and kill somebody in the meantime because they're following the speed limit. So I wonder if 25 is the right speed limit or it should be something higher. But that's where my thinking was going on that. And then, because of the fact that the state seems to want to build a rotary there, which I think is beyond crazy, I thought that perhaps this was a really good idea to have this voted in to see if 25 miles an hour, or whatever we could modify it to, I don't know, but we're talking about 25 right now, if that would even work, or if we would have traffic going other crazy places in town, or if the state of Rhode Island started offering office space for workers in Boston down there because they can't get through into Boston from this traffic issue that I realize is cut-through traffic that people take instead of taking the expressway, but the expressway is awful too. So it makes me wonder if we should just vote yes on this, see what happens, and then, depending upon what happens, then we can either keep it or put it back. If we don't like 25 miles an hour through there, we can tell the state we don't want their flipping rotary there, and it would give us more information. So I put those out there to you because I don't know what I'm doing yet. I have to decide really soon, and I'd kind of like to hear what other people might think about some of these dilemmas or opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Walker?
Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Can we hear from the Warrant Committee as to why they recommended a no vote, and from the Select Board as to what they would recommend?
Yes, by the way, I always do that before we go to a vote, but happy to do it now. Mr.
George
Asher, you're
Asher,
recognized.
Precinct 2, Chair Warrant Committee. As it's indicated in the warrant report, we received advice of counsel that said the town meeting was not was not supposed to instruct. The language itself said instruct, and we determined that we would follow town council's advice and vote against it because the language of it authorized the town meeting to instruct the select board to petition the court. That is exactly why. And again, it's in the report, and all of you can read that for yourselves.
Did you want to hear from the Select Board as well, Mr. Walker?
The Select Board is in favor of this, I guess it's motion as amended.
Okay, Mr. Walsh, you're recognized. I'm sorry, I didn't see Ms. Agostino. I'll come right back.
Ladies before Joe.
Well, there you go, Ms. Agostino.
Diane DiTullio, Agostino, Precinct 9, and actually my precinct involves this intersection. We have a motion on the floor, I believe, and obviously the way the original language was written, a no would have been appropriate, but now we do have a motion, so if the warrant committee could poll their members and we could get an updated vote, I'd like to address it then.
Okay, by the way, here's the process we typically follow. Everyone debates the article. At the end of the debate, we go back to the warrant committee if there's a motion to amend and ask their opinion. So I'm always going to ask their opinion. So is it important, if it's important to the body to find out the warrant committee vote now, happy to do that. But, so we won't forget them. So Mr. Asher, do you have the opinion of the warrant committee?
Mr. Moderator, George Asher, Precinct 2, Chair Warrant Committee. The Warrant Committee votes unanimously to support this amendment. Everybody here, our quorum, voted in favor of the amendment.
Okay. Mr. Walsh?
So
Oh, you have a follow-up.
I wanted that clarified because it sounded like the warrant committee was still voting no, but we had a motion. So now that it's been clarified, thank you very much. Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. I hope this is a unanimous vote for a yes, including town meeting member Virginia King. There are accidents there that you don't even hear about. And thank you to those who did get a number of people to sign the petition. I mean, I can only tell you, we've got 500 homes that are on the peninsula as you're heading to Randolph. The only access we have to going anywhere to leave our homes is to get on Randolph Ave. And since the new asphalt's gone down, the number of accidents, I just had to call one in 2 days ago, and it was serious. The person in the front car was taken by ambulance. There were 5 to 6 people seriously hurt just about a week ago, and I'm sure they're not enjoying their holiday season. This amendment, thank you very much, was very professionally put together so that it addresses any legal issues. It will go to the court. We've got the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee supporting it. As far as enforcement goes, there is never any enforcement of speed at that intersection. Occasionally, we used to see the state police, but I understand the barracks in Milton really is kind of just a hollow building. So as far as enforcement, proper signage, which is identified under Section 2 in implementing the establishment, proper signage will help. It also might get some of these people to stop cutting through town. Can you imagine doing something to help stop the cut through Milton? I mean, if in 2023, as Attorney King mentioned, if in 2023 a rotary goes in there and we're doing 40 miles an hour up until the rotary goes in, you can be sure those cars are going to drive right across the rotary. They're just going to be airborne. It happens all the time. You can just Google it. So I would implore everyone to support this. I thank those people that brought it to town meeting. And the bottom line is you can save a life from either death or from living with permanent disabilities from by having one less accident at that horrible intersection. So thank you all for supporting it.
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brian Walsh, Precinct 8 Town Meeting Member. Mr. Moderator, I rise to urge support of this motion, the amended motion before us. And I just wanted to just quickly share, for 6 years now, I've gone through that intersection every day. And the good news for me is I'm actually traveling against the traffic. I'm heading towards Randolph in the morning when you don't have to worry about the speed limit heading towards Milton because they'll never hit 25 the way the crowd, the slow traffic is, and the reverse at night. However, even though that's true, I didn't take account, but I'm going to guesstimate I've seen about 5 or 6 accidents at that intersection in just my brief experience. I used to have a banner in my office for many years, and it said, "The perilous journey of a good idea." And it had a number of sort of standard comments that are made, some of which I've heard tonight relative to this. The question is, we've had a group of residents bring forward a motion that they thought would dramatically improve the safety of residents. I'm telling you, I have no doubt that it will. And it's admirable they would have spent the effort working with the boards and the committees in this town to bring this forward. So rather than thinking of the reasons that this might not be a good idea or what about this, instead of getting to know, let's get to yes, let's do this and make a positive change for the town. I urge you to support this.
Let's see, Mr. Clark, were you next? Mr. Walker, were you waiting to speak? No, you're not, okay.
Dan Clark, Precinct Meeting 10. I don't know who to ask this question to, but I'm just curious, how does this work with 500 feet from this intersection, it becomes Randolph, not our town? How does that work with this becoming Randolph 500 feet from this intersection? But it sounds like Mr. Wells is the answer to the question. Do they adjust the speed limit in Randolph and Milton, or just in Milton?
Does anyone on the select board have an answer to this question? Would you come perhaps to the mic and Mr. Wells? So, Mr. Wells, please, you're recognized.
I didn't want to talk, but it's a state highway, so they can adjust it anywhere where they think safely and engineering-wise that they need to do so. So it doesn't really, the town line part of it doesn't really matter. That answer it okay? Okay.
Yes. So, you wish to speak to this motion to amend? Sir, you're recognized? Sorry, I can't see with the lights who everybody is. Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Joe McKettrick, Precinct 1. I would urge the body to support this proposal. And I think it's important, if you're going to send this to the general court, that it should be a unanimous vote from the town meeting. There shouldn't be any question about the need to work for safety on Route 28. And I'm very impressed that the town meeting is standing up and speaking out on this. And I think we should send it on its way with thorough and complete support. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion to amend? So let's just explain. It'll be two steps here. It may seem like one. One, we'll vote on this motion to amend, and you can approve it or not. If you approve it, we'll then go to a vote on approving that motion as the approved sense of town meeting. So two votes. All clear? This is just a majority vote. So all in favor of this motion to amend, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The motion carries. Now, I just want to check town council with one thing. Just a minute. Okay, so now, the motion before the body is to accept the language as amended as the sense of the town meeting. All in favor of approving the article as amended, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. By the way, if I could just thank Mr. Whiteside, he spent a lot of time working the language through the process as a citizen's petition to get it right, and it saved a lot of time tonight, so thank you, Mr. Whiteside, for doing that. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Seconded. All in favor? Opposed? No. Motion carries.